Thank you so much, Lena, Kate, David, Vadim, Andrei, and Sergey for being here today to present this new report on dangerous works, reprisals against environmental defenders, which is released already officially. I mean, it's online yesterday. Yeah, okay. Because I tried to download it from the website on Crude Accountability something like 3 days ago. It was still the for older version. Okay. So well, thank you so much for being with us today. I mean, I think that this report is extremely important because it not only raises, I mean, several big environmental issues in countries in Eurasia and also in the United States, but it also addresses something which is, I would say, extremely close to my heart, and I guess extremely close to the heart of everybody here, which is some fundamental issues of human rights, such as freedom of expression, freedom to criticize, to express one's opinions. And very sadly, as this report demonstrates very well, I mean, environmental defenders are, as you explained, under increasing attacks throughout the world, and not only in the former Soviet Union, but again, in much more democratic countries like the United States. And there are plenty of pressures on environment activists going, again, as you explained in your report, going from administrative to physical threats, among many other issues. And also, as you explained, which is really scary, in 2018, 164 environmental defenders were killed throughout the world, and many more suffered from harassment, threats, and violence. So, I mean, I of course let you present the report. I specify that this report has been prepared by 3 organizations, so Crude Accountability, in partnership with the Eco-Forum of NGOs of Kazakhstan, and Fact Tracker, which is based in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania. Before we start, let me just briefly introduce all of you. So David Lenker, who is Executive Director of the Fact Tracker Alliance and based in camp here in Pennsylvania. Previously, David served as Manager of Education and Outreach for the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and as the Director of Watershed Stewardship for the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. And David holds a Master of Arts degrees in Geography and Environmental Planning from Towson University. Vadim has been since 2014 the chair of Eco-Forum of NGOs of Kazakhstan, which is a national network of environmental NGOs. Vadim is one of Kazakhstan's leading experts on environmental law, and in particular the Aarhus Convention, for which he served as a member of the Compliance Committee from October 2002 to June 2011. Vadim's professional experience includes more than 20 years of work in the area of environmental protection, and he began working as an environmental legal expert in 1997. He has worked as a freelance legal consultant for UNDP, UNESCO, USA, OSCE, World Bank. I mean, the list is very impressive. Andrei Rudemacher is the founder and coordinator of Environmental Watch on the North Caucasus, which is an environmental NGO based in Krasnodar, so in Russia. Andrei has been a member of the Russian environmental movement for over 30 years. He has done a significant work to monitor environmental violations in the North Caucasus since the early 90s. And Andrei led a project to hold accountable the Russian government and the International Olympic Committee for violations associated with construction preparation for the 2014 Sochi Olympics. And Andrei has been harassed. I mean, I guess we're going to talk about that today. Harassed, physically attacked, and accused of labor and arrested many times for his engagement to protect the environment. Sergey is a consultant to Crude Accountability since 2009 and is responsible for the organization's activities in Kazakhstan. He's been an active participant in Kazakhstan environmental movement since 1990, and for 20 years He worked at the Ecological Society Green Salvation, which is one of the oldest and most respected public environment organizations in the country. And Sergei has a degree in electrical engineering and master in environment politics from Keele University in the UK. And Sergei's interest, Sergei works in protecting the human rights to a healthy environment and monitoring and influencing the activities of transnational corporations and international financial institutions operating in Kazakhstan and throughout Central Asia. And last but not least, Kate Waters is a co-founder and executive director of Crude Accountability. I don't know if Crude Accountability needs to be introduced, but it's an environmental and human rights non-profit organization working with natural resources impacted communities in the Caspian and Black Sea region since 2003. Kate works closely with activists in affected communities to develop strategies and campaigns to protect environmental and human rights on the local, national, and international levels. And Kate has worked with human rights and environmental defenders in Central Asia, the Caucasus, and Russia since the 1990s. And she's the author of many reports, and I strongly recommend you to read them. So thank you so much for being here. I'm so sorry we don't have a big crowd because I was explaining to Kate that we had 4 days in a row of conference on Central Asia last week. So, and there's an event which I don't know, I was not aware of. There's an event right now at the Canaan. So, but in any case,
that's all right. Nice we have the people who are interested in that.
Exactly.
What matters,
so
right?
Thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you so much for organizing this, Sebastian, for us. I want to talk a little bit about the report, sort of the framework of the report, and then really turn the floor over to our 4 environmental defenders here who can talk more specifically about the issues. But I want to talk about the trends that we found when we were writing this report. And as Sebastian rightly said, environmental defense, environmental work has become dangerous work, which is why we call the report that. And there has been a substantial amount of research on the impact of reprisals on defenders in other parts of the world. Global Witness, you may be familiar. Frontline Defenders has done quite a bit of work and research on this, but they haven't written anything about the former Soviet space, and they haven't written anything about the United States. And so when we first wrote the report in 2017, we did that, and then this iteration of the report, we were really lucky to be able to work much more in depth on the U.S. side because of our partnership with Fact Tracker Alliance and with Brooke, and really sort of having the opportunity to get those stories firsthand rather than simply relying on media reports, which is what we had done for the first iteration. So we're really, really pleased and grateful to you all for our ability to kind of go deeper into this. But what we've found is really quite disturbing. There are sort of 4 types of reprisals that we focus on in the report, which kind of generally encompass what we've seen, and I will mention those briefly. But the other thing is that it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the United States or we're talking about the former Soviet space. And the former Soviet space, of course, is not homogeneic. I mean, this is a very diverse and differing region, and so there are nuances there as well. But the main perpetrators of violence and reprisals against defenders, whether we're here or in the former Soviet space, are government entities and corporations, and the thugs, frankly, they hire to do their dirty work. You'll often see that a corporation starts to kind of push back on defenders, particularly in the United States, but not only. Governments may be standing by and sort of looking away, not doing anything. It's not like they don't know what's happening. And in some cases, as we see, mostly in the former Soviet space, it's government entities themselves that are perpetrating whatever the reprisal is. If we were to break it down very roughly by region, the United States and Ukraine are places where we see corporations really behind the ugliest activity. And in the other countries that we're talking about, it's primarily governments or their hired thugs that are doing the dirty work, or in the instances when corporations are involved in very close contact with government officials. That's a very broad sweeping brush, and it's much more nuanced than that. But if we were forced to sort of make the distinction, that's the big broad distinction that we would make. So this is very disturbing, right? These are the government is supposed to protect us. Corporations are supposed to act responsibly and along the sort of big broad social and environmental guidelines. Oftentimes we see financial institutions that are supporting a lot of this work are also complicit in the violence, the reprisals that we see, and that complicity can be active, and that complicity can also just be sort of taking the narrowest definition of their responsibility that they can possibly take. And we've seen that over and over again in our activism and in our work. So let me describe the 4 areas, and then I'll stop talking and let my colleagues speak. What we see is repressive legislation, and this can be broad legislation designed to kind of hold civil society in place. And this can be very specific legislation that's targeted towards environmental defenders. And this we see in the United States. And I'm sure you all know about the foreign agents laws and the undesirable organization laws that have impacted not only Russia, but a lot of the other countries in the former Soviet space. And those have sort of shrunk the space in which civil society organizations, including environmental defenders, can operate. And there are, other legal restrictions that are important, but those are 2 that are really critical. In the U.S., we see direct attacks on environmental defenders through legislation, and specifically on environmental defenders working against oil and gas extraction, and even more specifically against the construction of pipelines. So if you look at the report, you can see some of those examples, and I'm sure that Brooke will talk a little bit about this too. But we see that, just as one example, the Trump administration is trying to change part of the U.S. criminal code that would say that if you stand in front of a pipeline, you could be arrested on a felony charge and put in prison for up to 20 years. That legislation used to say if you damaged a pipeline, so if you put a bomb, or you smashed a pipeline, or tapped into it. Now that legislation says obstruction of construction, obstruction of existing pipelines. So you can be standing on your own property that's been taken from you through eminent domain, which is the other way that pipeline companies and other extractive companies get to do what they want to do. You can be standing on your own land trying to stop the destruction of a grove of trees through which a pipeline is slated to go. And if this law were to pass, you could be up to 20 years in prison. And then we have cases where individuals protecting their own land have been put in jail. And Brooke can talk about this. So the threats in the United States are not to be underestimated, and they're directly targeted at environmental defenders. The other legislation that is being widely discussed is actually through Homeland Security, to make pipeline protesters, to put them in the category of terrorists, that they are blocking the national interests of the United States, because pipelines most often cross from one state to another. So this is a federal offense of blocking economic activity in our country. So the first cases of that we saw at Standing Rock, but there are many, many, many more cases like that, and many of them in our report, and I'm sure that Brooke will talk about some of that. So that's one way. The second way so that's using existing legislation. The second way is what I was just talking about, creating specific legislation. The third trend that we see is slander and character defamation in the media, including in social media. Andrea is the victim of that, 3 weeks ago now, a really disgusting a smear against his character in Krasnodar Krai that puts people at risk. And we see this a lot on social media as well. And of course, we all know that social media is international. So if you're slammed on Facebook or Twitter, that's going everywhere. It's not just staying in your hometown. And then the final and most, I think, disturbing trend that we're seeing is violence against defenders. 3 environmental defenders were murdered in Ukraine during the past year. But there are many, many other cases of physical violence against defenders, whether it's, I don't even need to say more, just really ugly violence against defenders. And Andrei, again, has been the victim of a brutal attack on December 28th in 2017. And those who perpetrated that attack against him have still not been found, even though the entire thing was videotaped. So this is, again, where we come back to the complicity of the authorities and, in many cases, corporations. Corruption plays a very important role in all of this, as does the interests of wealthy businessmen, whether we want to call them oligarchs or kleptocrats or CEOs of major corporations, however we want to articulate that. So it's a very complicated and dirty mess. So I'll stop with that.
So who's next?
Maybe Sergei goes next.
Yeah.
It will be very short, just to provide a couple of cases from Kazakhstan. Both of these cases are connected with existing article in our Criminal Code 274 about dissemination of false information. The first case is concerns to activity of local activists, environmental activists. The second one, activity of environmental organization, Crude Accountability. The first case was dealing with Temirtau city, one of polluted city in the Kazakhstan. There is metal steel plant which pollutes local air a lot, and actually take into account so-called inactivity of local administration and first of all corporation, metal steel corporation, to improve environmental situation and so on. There are more and more activity from local residents just to protect own human rights and so on. And one of them is Stanislav Wojciechowski. He is local entrepreneur, and he decided to make video about air pollution and to upload it in internet, and just to try, first of all, just to try attention of local administration, central administration, to horrible environmental situation in Temirtau and so on. And of course, the company didn't like it, and after several attempts to shut down him, he decided to organize criminal case against him for distribution of so-called false information. And they applied to the criminal case and so on. And unfortunately, Stanislav couldn't organize legal assistance to protect himself in the court. Also, also later there were a lot of documents that he was right and his position and so on. And there was big pressure from his family, and moreover, there were several physical attacks. Usually it was anonymous, usually dark time, and he got several physical violation and so on. And he was needed just to stop his activity and to so-called concluded agreement with the company to so-called provide official excuse. It was false information, to publish it in the local newspaper and so on. But after this case, there was more information about activity of metal steel legal activity. This company was punished by official bodies as well. And right now, Stanislav is continuing his activity to protect local environment, and right now he works as director for local environmental organization. The second case is dealing with our organization, with our activity. We conducted for many years campaign just to help people in remote village Berezovka. Berezovka was situated near the Karchaganaka oil and gas field, and for many years they suffered from air pollution and so on. And after the big tragedy with poison of local children, it was in 2004, our officials in company decided to relocate these people, but during 10 years we raised up this issue that will be strategy and so on. And also not our officials, not Karchaganak Petroleum Operating Company took responsibility for this strategy and so on, and didn't provide real medical assistance to poisoned children and so on. First of all, from poisoning of toxics and so on. We try to collect money, we try to pay attention to these poisoned children and so on, and we produced several videos. It was collective work, not only from Crude Accountability, from other participants, from local, from international side and so on. And we got information that from 2016 local administration, local police tried to collect materials against us who participate in such kind of campaign and so on. And this spring, when I visited together with my wife Berezovka village, right now it's just village where there is no people and so on, and I would like to underline, to visit and to photograph this village is completely legal. There is no legal ban to visit this area. We were arrested, we were delivered to Aksai, it's the nearby city, gas capital, not so far from Karchaganak, and there, on the one hand, we were illegally arrested. There is no ban to visit this area and to photograph and so on. And other, it was surprising for me, I found to be so-called witness for some legal case against the campaign. And I just did know about it in the police station. There is criminal case that was opened 2 years ago. And the policeman tried to question me. I rejected, and for the second day I was in the Aksai city against with my lawyer. I was questioned, and in the end police didn't find any data against me and so on. But until now these legal cases continue to exist. Also our officials just stopped it, and actually it's so-called hook from other campaigns, for other participants of this campaign to protect health of Berezovka children and so on, to be questioned and maybe to judge it for some criminal and so on. What we did, what is reason between Wojciechowski case and our case and so on? Because we were more legal protected, because there was support from legal side, there was first of all huge solidarity from human rights organization, from local newspaper and so on. Immediately my case was in the center of media attention. It was really helpful for me, and after, when I was released from police station, I complied. I sent several letters to local prosecutor office, for regional prosecutor office, to general prosecutor office and so on. And there were complaint to UN special reporter for human rights defender, and there was special letter to Zarhus Convention in Geneva, because it's clear violation of Article 3.8 of the Aarhus Convention. And in this case there was huge help from Vadim, our lawyer, and big support from my colleague from Ecoforum, and he will provide more information. Just through these two cases I would like to underline two different approaches to protect ourselves, and how our officials are trying to use this article to shut down independent voices.
Yeah. I can take a second and actually show you guys the video that Sergey,
yeah, what reason
Crude Accountability is being prosecuted. Yeah. I don't want to use the word prosecuted, but being harassed. The video is pretty painful to watch, but it's real footage. It's like the real situation with the kids, and please pay attention towards the end of the video where we say, like, the officials did nothing, the doctors did nothing. Like, this is the exact phrases that angered the people so much. And of course they're complaining not about the English video, but the one in Russian. So here it is. you see, we are not naming names. The video is made like pretty emotional because it's for a crowdfunding campaign. No names, no officials, but they got angry with the phrase that they turned away. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Good afternoon. I will begin my short presentation, or just from with general observation. That's for the last 2-3 decades, the international community developed numerous documents on the access to information, public participation, access to justice, citizens' involvement into environment protection and sustainable development. Number of them even they considered the international law on the public environmental rights and the public participation in sustainable development. But if there will be nobody who will say this is the document, this convention, or this declaration is about me, it's about my environmental rights, but then it's just a book for your library. It's even will be book not for the shelf of the international environmental law. It should be in the dictionary, because in the absence of such persons like environmental defenders, it's just all the persons will, okay, I'm just a reader of this very nice environmental convention, but it doesn't, it's useless then for protection if nobody is the subject of environmental law and environmental rights. That's what's happening with the harassment, persecution, and penalization of environmental defenders. And if we will map the environmental defending on the, then you will see that many countries on that map will be just white spots already. That's what we are trying by this report to stop. That's to make all the countries on that map the just white spots. And now we will just provide some examples. That was nothing wrong was done by the person from our stories. Nevertheless, they were severely punished, or they are regularly facing the defamation sometimes from concrete person, sometimes from anonymous person. There is the very restrictive legislation, and sometimes there is a try to deter the activists by suspended, like in Sergei's case with the suspended criminal case, which may be initiated again and again every time when he will try to do something to protect the environmental rights in our country. So I would like to use the story from Kazakhstan, when one of our colleagues, Max Bakayev, he just published his opinion on Facebook on his account, and it was about the leasing the new decision of the government and the new legislation to lease the lands to foreigners. It was for the first time introduced in 2011, and then 2015 it was extended from 10 years to 25. And then some people were not happy about that decision, and they tried to express their protest against that decision. And what happened in the case of Max Bakayev? He just was the initiator. He applied for a protest rally in his city. Actually, he just appeared, and when it's rally, it was not permitted. He appeared. It's not so many people. They gathered at that place. No any public disruption. And his opinion on the negative environmental effects was based on the UN publication, and he referred to that publication. And also he just at the time when the the application for the protest rally was under consideration, he met some persons to share his opinion. And for these actions, he was sentenced for 5 years in a jail and far away from his home city, and he's still there. He was not released despite the pressure, despite the call from international organizations that he's still in jail. Another case I would like to present to you, it's last year. Every year the people from almost all countries, they gather together at the UN climate negotiations. And it's normally some country hosting this the climate conference. And last year it was Poland, it was Katowice, the city of Katowice. And of course, NGOs, people from NGOs, they can participate as observers, and they then should be accredited first by the secretariat, and then if it needed, they should get the visa. And 14 persons from Ukraine, Russia, Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, they stopped at the border and they were denied entry, detained for several days, and they were interrogated with, and the police, in some cases, police tried to intimidate them by that they will spoil their visa history. And I know personally several persons especially from Kyrgyzstan. A young girl, a young lady, she was that year in June, she was won our Youth Environmental Prize. Before of that, she was not well known outside of Kyrgyzstan. It was just her second participation in international forum. Nevertheless, the Polish government and Polish police somehow selected her, identified and associated with her the threats of public disruption in Poland. She speaks some English, but I can't imagine how the person who is unknown to other NGOs or the civil society in Poland, in Europe, will be able to organize protests in Poland. And all other persons, one lady, she's very serious. Okay, there are different persons who are participating from NGOs, but that young lady, she is very serious, and she was recently appointed the Deputy Minister of Ukraine, of Energy and Environment of Ukraine. That's to show you that's what kind of person was stopped and detained at the border. And the Georgian guy was from delegation, and he was also newcomer at the international negotiation. How they selected them and how they identified them as a threat to the national security, for me, it's a big question. Right? It's I don't know how it was. For me, it's clear. I would say, from my personal view, it was. They were selected randomly, and even it was biased approach. For me, what I see, that's the country. The participants were selected from the countries from which the Polish government will not have any problems, because the Belgian activist was stopped at the border, but then released after the consular somewhere from the embassy or consular office arrived. But that person was the head of the most influential climate network in Europe. But yes, okay, you can maybe expect that this lady will be at least able to organize some protests, but not I don't see any serious reasons to apply this let's say, punishment for the person from other countries. That's it. And there's many stories in this report, and the same approach. It's not about some criminals, yeah. It's just people who are trying to protect the environment in our countries.
Thank you, Vadim. Shall we go next to Andre and then finish with Brooke? Does that make logical sense? So here's my question. Do you all speak Russian?
Yes.
Everyone speaks Russian. So maybe what I can do is translate. Maybe we'll have Andre speak in Russian and then I don't have to translate for everybody. And we can translate for you into Russian.
That'd be great. I was going to ask you.
Россия и Казахстан сильно отличаются. Может, сначала по Казахстану вопросы?
Да
No,
нет,
no,
мы все уже
выступаем.
высказали, да.
Will you translate? Yeah. Oh, wow, thank you. That's fabulous. So Andre will speak in Russian. I was going to translate, but there's no reason for me to translate if you all are Russian speakers, and then you guys can do the.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
I'll do my best.
Excellent. Okay.
Коллеги, ну, я вот только что выступал в другой аудитории, здесь ну, кое-кто был, да, мне просто не хочется повторяться, ну, просто что, ну, вот я как бы работаю в России, вот, на Северном Кавказе один из таких сложных регионов, вот, и, ну, то есть важно, на что мы делаем, или важно, как нас именно преследуют, то есть, ну, просто, чтобы какой...
Важно,
что
как
именно...
преследуют.
То есть это
Да.
важно, да? То есть, наша организация существует с 97 года, то есть уже больше 20 лет. Будешь переводить или все знают?
Все говорят, здесь, кроме Брooke.
Все, да, ясно. Вот, то есть мы действуем сейчас в 6 регионах Северного Кавказа. Вот. Но наиболее активно это Краснодарский край и Республика Адыгея. Это западная часть Северного Кавказа. Мы занимаемся практически всем. Наша экологическая вахта по Северному Кавказу называется. При этом в связи с тем, что в стране ситуация усложнилась, усилилось давление, то мы как бы корректируем свои методы. Вот. То есть наша задача выжить в этих условиях, то есть все равно сохраниться, поэтому какие-то методы мы перестаем использовать, используем другие. Вот. То есть, например, сейчас мы практически не проводим протестных акций, хотя изначально, ну, вот наша организация изначально строилась именно на протестных акциях. То есть в 90-е годы, когда мы только начинали действовать, то есть мы активно применяли акции прямого действия, то есть разные блокады, то есть блокировали. Вообще это была такая именно протестная деятельность была в основе, то есть мы блокировали разные объекты, органы власти, именно таким образом пытались достучаться, и это было тоже достаточно эффективно. Вот. Потом как бы наши методы расширились, то есть сейчас мы все больше используем судебные механизмы, то есть идет много разных судебных процессов с нашим участием, пишем, ну, идет большая переписка очень, то есть, ну, выявляем нарушения, пишем в разные органы, то есть инициируем официальные проверки. Вот. И несмотря на то, что мы затрагиваем, ну, то есть мы, в общем-то, не особо смотрим, то есть мы боремся со всем, что как бы видим, да, и особо не оглядываемся на то, что если это... То есть в нашем регионе просто много проектов, которые связаны с первыми лицами России. Вот. То есть, ну, мы активно боролись, например, против Олимпиады 2014. Вот. То есть против многих резиденций, то есть строительство резиденций первых лиц в заповедниках там на побережье, то есть на землях общего пользования. Вот, при этом мы стараемся все равно сотрудничать, где это возможно, сотрудничать с властью, находить союзников во власти, и это нам, ну, в общем-то, достаточно тоже, то есть, удается, и, ну, благодаря этому, и даже сейчас, ну, в настоящее время удается очень многие вещи влиять, и организация пользуется, ну, особенно в Краснодарском крае у нас, ну, серьезное влияние на очень многие процессы. То есть сейчас мы, например, добиваемся создания многих особо охраняемых территорий, участвуем в этом процессе, то есть через процесс экспертизы и через министерство. То есть там, где нас не слушают, мы обращаемся тоже в суды. Вот. Ну а в плане репрессий, то есть я думаю, что среди экологических организаций в России, то есть наша организация является чемпионом по самым
Даже уже чемпионов управляют.
репрессиям. То есть против нас уже использовались, ну, я думаю, все методы, какие только возможно.
В этом году сколько было обысков?
Ну, в этом 3 было обыска, только нашего, то есть наш офис в Краснодаре в этом году уже 3 раза подвергался обыскам. Вот, в ходе одного обыска у нас изъяли вообще все носители, то есть больше там 50 дисков, 9 ноутбуков, то есть все носители там огромное
Может
количество.
быть, сейчас покажем, как выглядит обыск.
Ну да, это обыски, это такая спецоперация, войсковая спецоперация, как против террористов. Да.
Yeah, давайте
We found in
посмотрим.
Duke that some students don't quite picture what a raid is. They think it's like nice police. So I'm just gonna show you the first video of the police arriving, and
This is their security video from
Security
Vachta, because they've
footage.
been raided so many times, right?
What does CPC
Служба
Это МЧС.
МЧС, служба
oh,
спасения.
emergency response, because apparently being environmental is an emergency.
It was emergency response to Vachta activity.
See these guys in the black? Try and identify their faces.
Это ребята готовятся зайти.
То есть время без 5-6, он наверху написано.
So you can see this is 5:54 in the morning.
Спали.
То есть они подъехали, ждут, проснулись, не проснулись.
Не, они не ждут ничего, это просто... Они вообще раньше 6 не имеют права, но они начали раньше.
They don't
Ну,
have
всё,
the right
это
before
часы.
6 to
Часы
do this,
сработали и все.
but they started before 6, he says.
То есть в доме все спят. Вот.
everyone's all asleep?
Это частный дом?
Да.
Это не офис, да?
Ну, частный дом, но у нас там офис.
But that's where they're all asleep.
Кто снимает
Это для ФСБ.
Okay.
Потом через 2 часа на LinkedIn появился сюжет.
So this FSB agent here? Oh, you already said
Они имеют право 6 утра начинать.
Да.
No, I'm sure you did. So he said after 2 hours,
Да,
that
шесть
footage
приходят.
that
Почему не
the
с
FSB
4?
agent was on TV.
То есть еще, то есть все
А
спят,
4 они еще сами спят.
люди еще не успели просто проснуться, и вот они уже, то есть там прошло 40 секунд, когда они
Да,
позвонили.
да,
молодой
да.
человек, вот,
И этот молодой человек, который стоит
около грузовика, вот.
там в майке, это кто? Это просто
Это
молодой.
понятые, нет. Это понятые, тоже с ней приехали.
He's also one of them. He's also a
Okay.
security
All
police
of
officer.
these people, just that young guy in shorts, they're all
See what they're doing to the door?
То есть они открывают насильно, да? То есть им
Да,
надо...
Да, они 2 раза позвонили и даже не дали возможности людям проснуться, выйти, и сразу начали ломать дверь.
Кошмар. Это же частный дом.
А им плевать. Частные.
They're, like the camera just shook because they're shaking the building so hard.
Вот парень,
Кошмар.
парень полез.
Он уже лезет на окно. Ужас.
smashing the window.
Во двор проникает таким образом. Лен, лучше, наверное, второе уже видео
Okay.
показать. Тут
So,
уже понятно, как
You get
проникает.
the, you
и
get the picture,
Не получилось.
them
не
going
получилось.
in, and what do they do once they're in? That will be the next video.
А это вот
Which
уже как что было дальше в доме, так
Да,
сказать.
в доме.
Я просто...
here's the video from inside.
Вот Андрей проснулся
This is Andre.
Andrei.
In the right
с
corner.
автоматами.
That's Andre.
О, вау.
Все сразу, даже без всяких вопросов на пол. Плюс еще баллончиком с перцем брызнули в лицо, ну, чтобы не бузил сильно.
Ужас.
Да, вот следователь заходит. Что парень говорит,
Да,
лежи,
показывать, что он там приподнимается.
чтобы еще лежал. Вот его спецназовцам придавили. Ну, то есть вот живой террорист перед вами
Вот
сидит.
сейчас они на меня баллончиком там, то есть они там распылили этот перцевый газ. Вот так происходит.
Обычный
Pepper
обыск
spray.
после психологического акта.
Трудовые будни
Да.
экологического акта.
То есть они, причем они оцепили весь квартал, да, то есть
Get
чтобы
the
никто не
idea,
мог там
right? That's
подойти.
just half of the video, but yeah. Okay.
Ну, это было 30 июля, этот обыск был.
И чем закончился этот обыск? Потом...
Чем закончился? Ну, они там, ну, на самом деле, этот обыск имел пиар-эффект. То есть он делался, что 9, то есть это было в 6 утра, в 9 утра по РЕН-ТВ по всей стране вышел сюжет заказной, что провели обыск, ну, то есть что якобы это офис, это назвали офисом Открытой России Ходорковского, хотя мы к Открытой России никакого отношения не имеем вообще, да. Ну и все вот эти, мне даже не дали одеться, и там меня вот в трусах, так сказать, на всю страну, так сказать, демонстрировали. Вот.
Немаловажно, скажи, после этого вот эта фотография, то, что Андрей в нижнем
Да-да.
белье проснулся, неделю назад было использовано, фотографию распространили, обвинили его анонимной листовки, что он педофил, расстелили по району. Вот именно использовать это фото.
Это такой, ну это тоже, да, это последний такой, один из последних наездов. То есть,
Это очень традиционно для России, это не первая
нет,
акция.
нет, это не традиционно, это новое слово, такого еще не было.
В Челябинске было в прошлом году.
Вот.
Не знаю, что.
Ну, то есть нас уже, ну, что бесконечное количество раз наших активистов там задерживали. То есть, ну, по-моему, мы насчитали больше 45 раз, когда были, ну, аресты административные за последние там вот, начиная с 2011 года. То есть, такой был случай, конечно, то есть были уголовные дела, и в рамках одного уголовного дела даже, ну, реально, ну, Евгений Витишко, тоже известный тоже человек, вот его осудили на 3 года и посадили. Он 1 год и 9 месяцев он отсидел в колонии за то, что, ну, была акция против прежнего губернатора Краснодарского края, то есть он захватил на побережье участок общих земель лесного фонда, и ребята просто проводили акцию, я был против, в общем, проводили акцию, просто написали на заборе, что лес общий, и что Саня вор, как бы, ну, Саня, это бывший, да, Ткачев, бывший губернатор, то есть это сильно обидело. Было возбуждено дело уголовное. Насчитали, что этот забору был нанесен огромный ущерб. 160 тысяч этими надписями. Вот. И вот ребята судили. То есть один из них был вынужден уехать за границу. Это Сурен Газарян. А вот Евгений не уехал и
Получил 3 года.
попал, да,
За надпись на
колонию.
заборе.
Вот на меня было 3 уголовных дела уже возбуждено за эти годы. Тоже ну, в рамках этих дел. Но меня, слава богу, там никуда не сажали. Была только подписка о невыезде. Вот. Но, например, то есть одно дело было перед Олимпиадой. И оно было, как я понял, специально, ну, там якобы там я судью оклеветал. Ну, просто там за одну из публикаций. Но дело было специально, чтобы то есть я только поехал в Сочи. Тут же, причем меня никто там не вызывал, ничего. Я поехал в Сочи, тут же меня поймала полиция, что якобы в отношении меня есть привод. Я должен, так сказать, в Краснодар убыть. И меня, так сказать, ну, в общем, катапультировали обратно, чтобы я в Сочи не появлялся перед Олимпиадой. Вот потом большое количество, ну сейчас, большое количество было судебных дел именно. Ну, вот, нас включили в реестр иностранных агентов, и сразу посыпались против нас всякие, ну, в общем, иски о наложении штрафов. И ну, вот наша организация, то есть, ну, по иностранным агентам большое количество организаций независимых, как бы на них давление оказывалось, но мы являемся чемпионами, потому что вот на нас было 7 дел против нас было в рамках вот кампании по иностранным агентам. Вот у нас было наложено 900 тысяч штрафов в рамках этих дел. Вот, но 6 дел мы выиграли, вот, только одно проиграли. Вот, на мне висел тоже штраф 100 тысяч до недавнего времени, и я не мог выезжать за границу из-за этого. Потом сейчас началась новая кампания вот с этого года таких же. То есть сейчас нас объединяет в том, что мы сотрудничаем с Открытой Россией. То есть один штраф был вот весной, но мы тоже вот недавно буквально было, 10 октября была судебная, ну, то есть кассация, мы это дело выиграли, этот штраф отменили, но сейчас вот завтра 2 суда будет в Краснодаре по новые дела за то, что меня обвиняют. То есть я дал интервью МБХ медиа изданию, которое не имеет отношения там, ну то есть имеет отношение, но косвенное к Открытой России. Вот за это интервью обвиняют, что я участвую в деятельности «Открытой России». Я и организация. То есть одно дело на меня как на руководителя, другое на экологическую вахту. Вот, то есть они не стараются пытки нас этим путем на нас задавить. Ну, а самое критичное, конечно, что с определенного времени уже, ну, то есть это все-таки в каком-то непримерно правовом поле действует, да, там условно. Ну, уже пошли, так сказать, то есть, ну, мы выявили резиденцию тоже одного из первых лиц страны на побережье, незаконно там строящуюся. Провели там инспекцию, все там зафотографировали, и так получилось, что одного нашего активиста там задержали, и так они узнали, что эковахта там находится. Ну, его отпустили, я как бы, ну, я просто хорошо ориентируюсь в лесах, и, ну, в общем, мы туда вышли безопасно, оттуда уехали. То есть нас там на месте как бы не смогли задержать, но когда мы приехали, уже вернулись в Краснодар, нас там ждали, и было нападение на нас, ну, с целью изъятия именно съемок, ну и, как бы, видимо, с целью запугивания. Вот. Ну, вот я вот пострадал тогда достаточно сильно, мне там досталось от этого нападения. Ну, тоже где-то есть видео, можно посмотреть. То есть это тоже
покажи, пожалуйста.
теми же камерами снято.
Как нападение происходит?
This is hard to watch. I'm just gonna let you
It
know.
will take me a second to get that up, so you guys keep.
Ну, ладно, это я пока буду дальше рассказывать, пока дело найдет. Ну, вот это уже как бы, конечно, ну, то есть уже начался такое давление, которому нам трудно что-либо противопоставить, потому что сейчас мы вообще уделяем большое внимание различной безопасности, информационной, физической тоже безопасности, там, ну, особенно когда на выездах, то есть, хотя, конечно, ну, там, например, куда-нибудь едем, да, на какие-то объекты, где рискованно, мы просто выключаем все телефоны, чтобы невозможно было нас отслеживать, где мы находимся. То есть, или, ну, в любой поездке, когда мы ночуем, например, да, когда даже мы не шифруемся, мы за несколько часов ну, чтобы неизвестно, где мы ночуем, то мы тоже включаем все телефоны, вытаскиваем батарейки, чтобы невозможно было отследить, где мы ночуем. Ну, то есть есть уже даже, ну, угроза, как бы, угрозы и, ну, не только там какие-то правовые, но и таких вот криминальных нападений могут быть. Вот. Ну, очень тоже, ну, попытки дискредитации, то есть их тоже уже много было, то есть большое количество публикаций всяких заказанных там против меня лично, против организации. А вот последнее, так сказать, новое слово, с чем мы еще раньше не сталкивались, то есть, ну, в том районе, где вот находится наш офис. Давайте посмотрим дальше.
Нападение.
Расслабились, короче, там что-то еще начали надживаться около ворот. Ну, короче. А я, честно говоря, все произошло как-то быстро. Я мало что успел понять. Баллончиком потом врезали один раз и упал, стал подниматься еще раз и потерял сознание. Ну, что-то где-то минуту все это продолжалось, поэтому такие воспоминания сумрачные об этом во всем.
Ну так.
Ну, в целом мне повезло, конечно, могло быть хуже.
Оптимисты.
And he's saying he was lucky.
Не, но при этом человеку
He's
челюсть
saying
сломали,
he
нос
considers himself
повредили.
lucky.
Could have been worse.
Yeah.
Ну, я говорю, что, то есть, последнее, так сказать, слово с их стороны, это вот в том районе, да, они расклеили листовки с моей фотографией, с адресом дома и написали, что в Краснодаре орудует банда педофилов.
Возглавляют ее деревья.
Вот, с указанием всех наших данных, то есть уже попытка натравить просто, причем это на школах там в том районе, то есть попытка уже натравить просто вот людей, как бы, да, то есть, да, даже, ну, уже такие методы. Ну вот, это вот, к сожалению, российская действительность. И, ну, в России сейчас в этом плане очень тяжело, то, что демократические механизмы не работают, то есть силовые органы живут такой отдельной жизнью, и даже, ну, например, говорю, что в принципе у нас есть поддержка отчасти власти. То есть, например, у нас ну, по экологическим вопросам поддерживает губернатор Краснодарского края, но даже это абсолютно не защищает вот от таких вещей. То есть, ну, и за всем этим прежде всего стоит, конечно, ФСБ. То есть Федеральная служба безопасности, да, то есть вот они как бы организаторы всего этого. Но тем не менее, все равно я считаю, что в России все равно можно, то есть это все не безнадежно, и можно действовать, и можно что-то менять. И, ну, мы, по крайней мере, все равно, вот, несмотря ни на что, мы выигрываем дела в судах. Вот сейчас, например, ну, вот уголовное дело по этому нападению, оно всячески там тормозится, да, но вот мы подали в суд о незаконном бездействии следствия, и суд нас, как ни странно, поддержал. То есть и суд обязал следствие там, ну, предпринять определенные действия, поэтому я все-таки надеюсь, что... Ну, так мы все равно, я думаю, что, ну, как бы, мы как бы, ну, не знаю, победим или не победим, но прогресс есть, как бы, то есть не я сказать, что все там... И нам удается очень много именно в Краснодарском крае, в Адыгее, как бы, менять и потихоньку... ну, мы еще в Ростовской области, в Ставропольском крае. То есть по многим вопросам предохранным нас поддерживает прокуратура, то есть мы, ну, то есть удается изменять очень много и даже на системном уровне, не просто какие-то точечные вещи. И останавливать и крупные проекты.
Спасибо. Спасибо, Андрей.
В целом, я хочу сказать, что в целом даже в сложных условиях все равно можно работать, и можно работать, как бы, достигая многого. И ну, вот, наш подход в том, чтобы, если бы таких организаций, как наша, было много в России, да, вот, то ситуация в стране бы, ну, менялась бы в лучшую сторону. То есть именно, ну, изменения должны расти как бы снизу. И не обязательно это только от политических сил, от гражданского общества тоже очень много зависит.
Спасибо, Андрей. The floor is yours, Greg.
How do I follow that? Oh,
We're waiting for horrible stories from the United States.
well, so tell me, you're gonna translate?
Yeah, если что-то непонятно. Andrei understands
Oh,
a
okay.
whole bunch, but
Okay.
если что-то непонятно, ты мне даешь.
Хорошо.
You can just
Okay.
speak freely, yeah.
So I thought it would be helpful if I tell you a little bit about who I am and especially what Frac Tracker does, and provide some context both about the organization and also some of our experiences, and then come back to some of these environmental defenders and their stories in the U.S. So I have to say I'm very humbled when I hear the stories of people like you who have endured so much. And I've been very fortunate, as I'd say my colleagues at Frac Tracker, that we haven't had to endure those kinds of things. Now, I will say we've had some experiences that give us just a taste of what you have to go through. So, for example, we've been followed, and security personnel has, tried to intimidate us. We've had a little bit of that, but again, nothing quite like you experienced. We've also had cyber attacks that knock our website down, and it goes offline for a while, and then we have to figure out, scramble to get it back up. And we have a lot of information that people that are fighting oil and gas development in the U.S. and to some extent more broadly utilize. So that's I think very intentional that these things are happening, and I'd say those are the two primary things that we've experienced. But our work at Frac Tracker brings us in interactions with activists all over the U.S. at different times, and their stories are what are really disconcerting, and especially I think when we look through it at the lens of the United States is supposed to be this beacon of democracy, of freedom, and that we shouldn't have to endure these corporate or governmental intercessions into our lives, and we should be able to speak our, have free speech, and the more I learn, I like to say I wasn't really a conspiracy theorist before I got into this work, and now I do question things a lot more. it's been very eye-opening. So so just very quickly, Frac Tracker was a website that was developed at the University of Pittsburgh in 2010 to study this new thing called fracking that was happening very heavily in Pennsylvania and in some of the neighboring states. And about 2004 or 5, this new kind of drilling, unconventional drilling or fracking, came to that area and ramped up very fast. So it was very prevalent. And we heard these stories of people were getting sick. There were all these problems, and people were questioning what's going on. Where is this happening? So this website was designed to be a portal of information, a mapping platform, so you could see visualizations of these things, and pretty soon we realized it just that website became very controversial because of all the political landscape around these issues. And so eventually, and that's sort of when I became involved, we formed an organization. The website moved out of the university. They were happy to see it, to release it to somebody else. And we formed the Frac Tracker Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization. And we realized that the problems, the things we were seeing happening in Pennsylvania were happening in other states where drilling was occurring. And today, just to put this in context, now I think there's active extraction in something like 35 states. So it's pretty ubiquitous across the country. And so pretty soon we were setting up shop in Ohio and in California. And certainly we do some work, in Ohio and New York, and you get the idea. And so we're just a team of 8 staff, and as you know, headquartered in Pennsylvania. But anyway, again, this work we study, we map, we do a lot of analysis and work with data on these issues, not just drilling and fracking, but of course all the pipelines, downstream infrastructure, all these things around these issues. And it's been extremely eye-opening to us. And in fact, it's what encouraged us to begin an awards program to honor activists, because there was nobody was celebrating the hard work and sacrifices of those people specifically. I mean, there are other sort of human rights awards, but we thought that it was necessary. So just a few things, a few reflections on our work, and I should mention we do a lot of work. A lot of our data and mapping is for frontline activist organizations, as well as larger NGOs, and even researchers. Sometimes we work with researchers. But again, setting the context for some of this, what's happening in the U.S. is this industry has spread out, and it's gotten more intensive, more resource intensive, more water, more sand. Everything is required for these activities, and it's also some of the assumptions around some of their work, the industry's work, is changing. So, for example, a few years ago, it was all about fracking. That's what we were focused on, and then we should have seen this coming, the wave of pipeline activity, because this product has to be moved either to consumers, or it needs to be, and this is another change in the sort of business model for this industry, is it more and more it has to go overseas, because they have to get the price up, they have to make money, and so if they can liquefy it and export it, it helps sustain what they're trying to do. Also, another new scenario in this work is plastics. So we're seeing petrochem and plastic activity ramp up in places like the Gulf Coast, where it's already been a substantial industry. Now it's growing there, and much to our concern, it's growing in the Ohio Valley too, where Royal Dutch Shell is building a a giant ethane cracker to make polyethylene, and just just to show sort of the pace of this, we just heard yesterday there's belief that Exxon wants to build a cracker in western Pennsylvania too. So, and of course, this is at a time, when we have these global a global plastics crisis, let alone a climate crisis, and the industry must see that somehow they think they can continue to make money in fossil fuels if they hook us on more plastic. So, so with that as I think it's just some important context and backdrop that we're not just fighting fracking or pipelines now, we're also fighting petrochemicals. But obviously it's all very detrimental. And so when we started this work, we weren't seeing a lot of intimidation or legal. I mean, I wasn't as exposed to as much of that, at least. I mean, I'm sure it was happening. It was then, and it still is, a lot about health issues, health impacts from people that live near this stuff. We have a cancer cluster of a rare cancer called Ewing sarcoma in southwest Pennsylvania that is become very controversial. People aren't getting answers to why this is happening, and of course there's a strong correlation with the density of drilling and waste issues with fracking. So, so human health, this Ewing sarcoma cluster has to do with children. So it's even more, I guess, alarming. But obviously people that have lived near this have had all kinds of health ailments, skin rashes, headaches, nosebleeds. The list goes on. Much more severe things. There's been lots of health studies on that. So that's egregious in and of itself to have to sacrifice your health. But then there are all these other dimensions of more of the kinds of things that are highlighted in the Dangerous Work Report. And those types of injustices have expanded as Kate mentioned, with pipelines in particular. So we've seen a lot of things like property rights being trampled. We've seen legal maneuvering as a type of intimidation, and then also the physical intimidation, the presence of private security. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I also wanted to just mention that there is, whereas in the U.S. cases, the corporations do hold a lot of power, and they certainly manipulate a lot of the politics with all this money. But it's interesting too that I think of a lot of the decisions, especially in the Pennsylvania situation, a lot of it is at the local level, local government. And local government is very compromised in many cases. I mean, there are some local government heroes that are actually standing up to this industry. But there are also so many situations where you have township supervisors or local commissioners who have leased their own land for drilling, or they are invested personally in their stocks, and those things are invested in some of these companies, and so that reality is very prevalent. They're also compromised in that a lot of money from the taxes on this industry, or the fees rather, go back to local government. So it's been of some benefit to them, at least in a short-term perspective. And so, in some cases, they like this industry, and so that's a problematic, sort of backdrop to this. And also, of course, state officials. For some of the same reasons, but in this case, maybe it's more about supporting their campaigns than some of the other things I mentioned. And in fact, in California, we just found some of the work we did working with some other NGOs pointed to the fact that the state regulatory agency for oil and gas in California, that the head of that agency and some other high-level employees were heavily invested in the very companies they were regulating. So thankfully, because of our data, the head of the agency was let go. Some of these other people were, and in fact, Governor Newsom just renamed the agency and added new dimensions to their mission. So that's exciting. But anyway, I don't want to talk about all those things. I want to talk about some of these amazing people that have had to make a lot of sacrifices to stand up to the industry. So in particular, I just want to highlight a few cases that I was involved with in terms of, I know the people, and I wrote up the cases for the report. And they reflect upon those themes I mentioned about property rights and legal intimidation and physical intimidation. So Ellen Gerhardt is a retired school teacher, special education teacher, nicest lady, lives in central Pennsylvania, central being really smack dab in the middle of the state in this case. And she and her husband have this beautiful property, and they were set to retire there. And she, in fact, had recently retired, so she was starting to live her peaceful retirement years out when the Mariner East pipeline was proposed. And it is a 300-plus mile line that goes across southern Pennsylvania. And its primary purpose is to move ethane, which is a natural gas liquid, to the Delaware River for export, to make plastics in Europe. And so, interestingly though, an ethane pipeline in and of itself isn't seen as a public necessity. So it usually isn't granted the right of eminent domain. And I'm sort of simplifying the legal arguments because I'm not an attorney. but in this case, they tried to argue that there's sometimes there could be some other mixtures in this. There could be some propane shipping through it, and that could be a source of home heating fuel. So therefore, they got permission from the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission to have the right of eminent domain. So county by county, as this pipeline crossed Pennsylvania, there were numerous cases. I think in my home county of Cumberland County, there were 18 cases where eminent domain was exercised. And so multiply that, you can imagine there were probably hundreds of cases. So in the situation of Ellen Gerhardt, this pipeline was coming through. She said, "No way, I don't want this on my property." So of course there were legal challenges, and in short, there was an escalation of these battles, and just by walking onto the right of way, which of course at one point in time she was then given an injunction she couldn't even walk on her own part of her own property anymore. Workers kind of fabricated a story that she had been there all day and she hadn't been, and she was thrown in jail. And not only was she thrown in jail, this little old lady, if we want to think of her that way, she appreciate that characterization, but I'm trying to convey this story to you. But they put her in solitary confinement for, I think, I forget how many days it was, but I think it's highlighted in the story. But the point is, being thrown in jail for being on your own property is there's something very un-American about that. And then meanwhile, in addition to that, just there were environmental, just sort of mistruths about the wetlands that would be impacted and that kind of thing. And she is still trying to call that out, still pushing back that they didn't do the right environmental studies on the property, that they are affecting wetlands, and she's going to, I think, win that case. I don't know what kind of recourse she can have at this point, but also during her case, there were weeks on end when there was 24-hour surveillance, there were private security with spotlights on this pipeline corridor for no reason, and just the generators would run, and it was this constant noise, constant light, and how do you sleep? How do you have your sort of just your quality of life when that's going on? So that's just one story. There's lots of stories like Ellen's in various ways. And another one, just really quickly, I'll share too, is Megan Holleran's story. Slightly different, but some of the same dynamics. Ironically, it's a different pipeline company, Williams, also in Pennsylvania. And in this case, she was actually, this young lady, her whole family was involved in this situation. It was a family property. And this young woman was actually doing archaeological studies, surveys for that company, but in a different place. And she found out from a coworker that your property is in harm's way. And this was realized that they were coming through, and of course soon they approached her family and wanted to put the pipeline, the Constitution pipeline. You have to love these names. The Constitution pipeline going through her property. They didn't want it. Of course, a judge gave, they had eminent domain rights that they shouldn't have had to go through her property for an unnecessary pipeline, and pretty soon there were all these very egregious things. Her family, her aunt, couldn't go out her back door because technically it was in the right-of-way zone of however many feet. But the real injustice in Megan's story has to do with a grove of sugar maples. They had a maple sugaring operation there, and as part of this operation, they asked the company, please don't go through the sugar bush. Please don't go through there. And nope, that's where they wanted to go. And so there were battles about when they would cut the trees, everything. But it was horrendous to have to watch this thing you nurtured and watch grow. This happened. So not only did eventually, of course, they come in and cut the trees, but the day they did that, the day they cut the trees, for some reason, even though Megan's family had talked to the state police and had good relations with the local state troopers and said, we'd like you there just so they don't make any accusations against us. So kind of be there to help keep us safe. And they did. And even the state troopers were horrified when U.S. Marshals came out with the company and had automatic weapons. And there's photo documentation of this too, where you have these agents jumping out of vans, automatic weapons, walking around very nervously while the tree crew starts cutting the tree. So anyway, again, it's horrifying to think about these things happening in the USA, and they do. And in fact, these happen right in my home state of Pennsylvania. So, and the other tragic grievance that they have in Megan's situation is that they cut their trees down, which were being used for economic purposes, and they've never seen $1 yet from Williams Pipeline Company, and that pipeline was abandoned. Now it's still a battle. It was abandoned because the state of New York wouldn't give a permit, so it kind of was going to nowhere. But there was a ruling in New York State, or a federal ruling, that New York supposedly has to give the permit, but they've appealed that, so it's not a done deal yet. But still, as of publication of this report, there's not been $1 given to the Hollerans. And then just really quickly, because I know I've gone on a long time, I apologize. The last story I was highlight is Vera Scroggins, who's been a longtime activist, Northern Pennsylvania, and the crux of her story is that she watched this place called Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania. It's just pastoral, dairy country, rolling hills, transform as one of the most heavily drilled counties in Pennsylvania. And not only did it transform rapidly, it's where there was a really bad water contamination case in Dimock, Pennsylvania, where several homes have lost their water. But she sees water buffaloes, these water tanks, all around her county because so many people have had water contamination but have signed non-disclosure agreements with the industry. But ironically, even though we have in the fracking activities across the country, we have, and even in Pennsylvania, we have so many different operators. But there's one particular operator called Cabot Oil and Gas that is the premier driller premier operator in Susquehanna County. And so they control through their leases and their well pads and their compressor station, everything else. They control a lot of the county. And Vera is an activist, and she was documenting with cameras and video cameras all of these activities of this industry. And they got annoyed. They got really annoyed. She was bringing bus trips with celebrities. And so Vera, they accused Vera of trespassing. A local judge who had oil and gas interests put an injunction into effect that would basically preclude her from almost everywhere she goes in the county, from the grocery store, because it was within however many feet. I think it was 500 feet, I think, 1,500 feet of every bit of Cabot controlled leases, well pads, etc. So she was precluded from living her life, basically. Finally, after appeals and everything, that was downgraded to a much smaller setback where she has to stay away from their facilities, but she can at least move around a little bit easier now. But she has this injunction for life. It's an injunction for life because this company doesn't like her and they've singled her out. So anyway, those are 3 stories. There's lots more. And of course, we know about the situation that happened on the Dakota Access Pipeline and things like that. But again, it's humbling. I'll just close by saying it's so humbling to meet people like all of you who've endured so much. And I feel guilty sometimes because I go home and generally speaking, I haven't had to face things like anywhere near that, And but hopefully, there's a lot of solidarity in our movement, and we shall overcome.
One of the things we just very quickly, one of the things we said when we were at the previous meeting we were at was that one of the things that has protected us so much in all this is our solidarity, and that this is international solidarity, and that's something that the environmental movement really has that maybe some other social movements don't quite so much. But yeah, we mentioned that earlier, that solidarity is really critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Shall we open up for questions?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.